David, one of the topics that people, physicists, philosophers, theologians talk about today is the fine-tuning of the universe. And some have developed what has been called the anthropic principle, using anthropic reasoning, to be able to explain why this incredible fine-tuning, like the cosmological constant, works and why we're here. What do you think of that?
I hate it. I think that it's conceivable, it's possible that some of these arguments are right. Unfortunately, because they fly, of course, in the face of the traditional goal of physics, which is to explain what otherwise appear as coincidences, to explain some of the bizarre features of nature that seem to be necessary for our existence. And historically, people have been led along this path many times when confronted with phenomena that are they couldn't explain or seemed to be specially arranged for our existence. And so far, as we've gained understanding, those coincidences turn out to be quite explainable. That happen with respect to many things, such as, for example, water, ice floats. Most solids, when they freeze, are heavier, denser than the liquid and sink. If water is the opposite. We understand that very well and can calculate the properties of ice and water and compare. And because we now understand chemistry, we understand the structure of atomic physics. But that's absolutely necessary for life to have evolved on the planet. Much better to be able to calculate it than to attribute the strange properties of water to the fact that we're around to ask the question. And that's been true of many things. Nuclear physics we now understand completely in a theory with almost no parameters. And there are properties of nuclear physics that are essential for all heavy elements, such as carbon, to have evolved in stars.
For that to happen with the constants of nature, from the cosmological constant, which has to be explained to 50, 60 decimal points, to many others, the ratio with electromagnetism to gravity, which will enable certain things. It seems like there are so many of these, each one of a different nature.
There used to be so much more. People in the 19th century looked at life, such a crazy, from a point of view of the physics they understood at the time, such a totally different kind of object. That's why biology or animate matter was regarded as something totally different than normal matter. And people had absolutely no idea until halfway into the 20th century. People were arguing that there had to be some kind of new force of nature, some kind of new entity that was responsible for life. And until DNA was discovered, there were eminent scientists arguing that it was impossible to explain life on the basis of chemistry. And now we know that something as strange and wonderful and miraculous as life can be explained in terms of chemistry, we believe. And chemistry can be explained in terms of atomic physics. And atomic physics can be explained by theoretical physics in a theory which has one parameter that we don't understand, period. All of atomic physics, all of chemistry, all of biology, we believe, is explained in terms of a beautiful theory with one parameter, period. Now, who would have ever imagined that? And indeed, people didn't. They thought there was the life force or other anthropic
but
or
in fundamental
design.
physics, though, even by its name, is fundamental. Biology is up here in a hierarchy of understanding the physical world. And now we're operating really down to very small lengths, incredibly fundamental aspects. And what we find is a whole series of different relationships, numerical constants, all of which seem to have to be within a very tight range.
No, but almost all of which have, well, if their fundamental structure of the universe that affects us is governed by, indeed, very few parameters. You need the history of the universe in order to create planets. And so people now argue about cosmology, about the cosmological constant, an area where we still lack deep knowledge. And faced with, again, puzzles, deep puzzles, at the moment, insoluble puzzles, they throw up their hands and say, well, everything's possible, which you can indeed find theoretical models to, and then argue the universe that was picked out, the one we live in with the right cosmological constant, was done so simply because we're here to ask the question. In other words, there were zillions of other pockets of the multiverse that were created, but they had a bigger cosmological constant,
or smaller,
or very smaller, and therefore there aren't people around in those to answer the question. So, could be, but more likely we just don't understand enough to answer that question. I regard, at this point, especially on the basis of the state of the fundamental theory, which has been called on to answer these questions and is far from complete and far from satisfactory, as this giving up, and I regard it as giving up, certainly in the traditional sense of physics, as highly premature.
Is the alternative only this? Either we have some fundamental theory which indeed can explain all of these constants through one theory, or we must rely on this so-called anthropic principle to explain the fine-tuning.
The anthropic principle doesn't explain anything. It simply says, tough luck. You're never going to really understand it. It was a historical accident. This part of the universe ended up here, and that's it. And there are other parts that behave differently. That might be true. My problem is that, and if so, it means we lose a lot of predictive power. A lot of the things we thought were tied together in a fundamental way are accidents. That's happened before in physics, and the proponents of this point of view point to the fact that we now understand that the radii of the planets in our solar system are determined by a historical accident in a complex, chaotic system. We have no hope of calculating them. I still have hope of calculating the fine structure constant and even the cosmological constant. And I just find it a little premature. I know very well what the theoretical basis for the models that might make this possibility rational, and I think they're far from trustworthy at the moment, and one shouldn't give up. The way to countervail that, as it was in the understanding of life, see, when people were faced with how could you pack all that information needed to construct a human being into a little sperm? I mean, this is absurd. There has to be an inherent life force, something not explainable by science. And if you take that attitude, you would not have been led to the biochemistry that eventually led to DNA discovery and to understanding the molecular, the chemical nature of life and how it works.